This is how my brain feels. I'm going to decode the complexities of today's topic so your brain can understand rather than explode, which begs the question, what makes a bow shoot an arrow fast? It's a pretty complicated question with a lot of contradictory opinions, and I completely understand why. I'm on my own journey to find out what makes a bow shoot an arrow fast. And it's not one factor, it's many. The reason this topic is extremely interesting to me is because I make bows, and if I can kind of predict how fast a bow will go based on the design before I make it, then I can make better bows. I've spent most of the last 10 years figuring out how to make bows shoot smooth, and that's kind of what I've specialized in. Now switching my brain to speed is changing everything, but speed and smoothness are less contradictory than I originally thought, which is getting me very excited to find out what makes it fast so that I can make smooth and fast bows. Now, to help illustrate some of this complexity, I want to share a story that you might have heard before. The tortoise and the hare. Take these two creatures. One of them is super fast, one of them is super slow, and they're going out for a race. The fast one, the hare, is destined to win the race because he's super fast, much faster than the tortoise. And as a matter of fact, he takes off and gets a significant lead. But after a little bit of time, he gets bored and a little tired and is just gonna sit down for a little rest. While the tortoise plunges along nice and slow and continues to go. And by the time the hare wakes up from his rest, the tortoise has crossed the finish line. The obvious thing is that the hare would win, but the truth is the tortoise did. The obvious thing may be more than it seems. It's not what it's cracked up to be. It promises more than it delivers. All hat, no cattle. A letdown in disguise, more bark than bite. The obvious thing is that by increasing the poundage on a bow, it'll shoot faster. But the tortoise says, but if you increase too much mass, that may not be the case.
You know, the main thing that you have to deal with is mass. I mean, that's the first hurdle. There's several hurdles you want to get into. You want to make sure the limb is made with the least amount of mass possible so that it'll move quickly.
Meet Trey Slickton. He's been teaching mounted archery for 20 years, and he's also been studying the topic we're talking about today. He was generous enough to help me teach this video, and as a matter of fact, he sent me 15 minutes of gold that I've posted over on the Shatterproof Archery page. So go watch his full video because I'm taking and testing some of his ideas. Thank you, Trey, for helping me here. I hope we get to do more together in the future. So the actual true statement is a heavier draw bow makes for a faster bow if the energy gained is greater than the energy lost by changing the design or adding mass to the bow limbs. And that's just one of the maybe 25, 30 factors that go into this equation. That's why it's complicated. So my goal is that if you leave this video knowing a few more things and not feeling confused, then I win. So we're gonna do some amazing tests with 10 different bows to try to prove some theories that I have about bow speeds. Theory 1, in the Traditional Bowyer's Bible, Volume 1, Tim Baker says, the only way to put more energy into a bow with the consistent draw weight and draw length is, and I quote, is to design it to have a harder pull in the early and mid stages of draw. His theory is that by having a heavier draw early on, it's gonna store more energy and make the arrows go faster. The next theory we'll test is that the limbs work a shorter distance on faster bows.
Kramer's video, he was talking about how the shorter bow tends to be faster with the shorter working part of the limb. And yes, that is so much true because it's storing so much energy and it just really wants to snap back. But there's also a counter to that. So if you see this shorter bow, with this, it's storing a lot of energy, but the limb tip is moving almost twice the distance as the limb tip on the longer bow. What ends up happening is that this bow from full draw to brace only has to go half the distance. So in many times, that longer bow is actually faster.
This concept kind of hurt my brain because it seems like if the bow's bending more, then it's gonna store more energy and shoot faster, right? But then if you explain it the other way around, where if the bow limb travels a shorter distance, but the string's traveling the same distance from your full draw, then that shorter distance will travel quicker, making the string go faster, making the arrow go faster. And then when I thought of it kind of that way, it kind of made sense. The third theory we're testing today is that the limbs have an optimal position relative to the bow handle when unstrung. For example, this bow right here, the limb tips are 8 inches in front of the handle, whereas this one is 2.5 inches in front of the handle. What's the optimal range of an unstrung bow's limb tips relative to the handle for the fastest bow? We're gonna test those 3 theories. Here's how I'm gonna proceed with the testing. First, I'll find the distance of an unstrung bow to the center of the riser. Next is finding out the distance that the limb travels from brace height to full draw. I'm using tape and I'm precisely marking the exact corner right where the tip of the tip overlay is. Next, I'll draw the bow to full draw, get it all the way down to that 28 right there, and I'll do the same thing with the corner of this other piece of tape. Knowing the exact inside corners are the measurement makes this a whole lot more precise. And we get 7 and 13/16, so I can get down to at least the 1/16 of an inch preciseness. Next, we'll gather draw weight at 10 inches, 15 inches, 20 inches, 24 inches, and then finally 28 inches.
Draw length is normally measured from the back of the riser, so I adjusted the measurement on the tillering tree per riser size to keep accuracy consistent between each bow.
Now I'll take this bow and shoot it through the chronograph. I'll use the same arrow for every single bow to promote consistency, and I will also average out the speeds and take multiple shots per bow to get it as accurate as we can. Then we'll take the total draw weight and divide it by the arrow speed to see how many feet per second on average we're getting per pound of draw weight. This should give us a general idea around a bunch of different bows. Now I'm just going to continue doing this for 10 to 15 bows of as many different designs as I can gather from around the shop. So it's time for me to get to work. Hopefully we can find some patterns to answer the question, when it comes to bow design, what factors affect bow speed the most? What should we be paying attention to predict how fast a bow will shoot? So here's what I learned. The first question is, does early heavy draw lead to a faster bow? The answer is most of the time. It appears that if the early heavy draw is extreme, you need static limb tips for the bow to be fast. If they're bending, it wasn't so fast. It also appears that the heavier early draw does not actually translate to a faster bow with these 10 bows. I've been really wanting to prove this idea true. I haven't been able to yet. When I made this bow 4 or 5 videos ago, I made it to be fast based on the early draw idea. The early heavy draw idea. Then I realized it wasn't fast, so I wanted to do a follow-up video on speed to say, why wasn't this fast? Trying to figure this concept out. And now that I got information on these bows and actually graphed the data, this bow hit 70% of its full draw at 20 inches. This design by far had the heaviest early draw, but it's not that fast. This bow's kind of in the middle range. At 20 inches of draw, you hit 63% of this bow's total draw weight. And that tends to be the sweet spot because the bows that were in between 58% of its total draw weight and 63% of its total draw weight at 20-inch draw was the fastest. It's almost like there was this sweet spot of early draw that is fastest. Seems like if there's too much reflex, it can slow it down a little bit, but if there's not enough reflex, it can slow it down as well. There's this kind of a sweet spot in the middle with a lot of these tests. The second thing we tested is that the bow is faster when the limbs move a shorter distance from brace height to full draw. Is this true? It's absolutely true if you could keep the mass the same. The problem is you have to add so much material that it gets heavier, and that can counteract the speed gained. Here's the idea wrapped up in a nutshell. Bow limbs that traveled from brace height to full draw 7.5 to 8 inches of movement were the fastest. Again, the ones that traveled less than that were too long of bows and had so much mass and were like a full hickory bow. Or the other long bow I used had a maple inlay, which is slower than bamboo, and so much mass in those that they weren't faster. But the ones in the middle range of 7.5 to 8 inches of movement in the limbs were much faster than the ones that were above 8 inches. And the only two below 8 inches were the 68 and 72 inch longbow that has a lot of limb tip weight and are completely straight longbows. So the third thing we're asking, is there an optimal amount of backset we need for a faster bow? And the answer is yes, but it's based on bow design. So I think we could separate static limb tips from working limb tips. And the answer to that question will be different for these different categories. But let's say for the normal recurve or longbow where the tips are bending at least a little bit, there is an optimal amount of backset based on my testing. 1.5 to 2.5 inches of backset proved to be the most efficient and fastest bows. For whatever reason, when we get really far into backset, we're not getting as much efficiency.
You got to be careful how far forward in the handle you get, otherwise you lose your stability and the wheels fall off the bus.
In general, the longer the bow, the less the limbs travel forward. But with the specific bows I tested, the 68 and 72 inch long bows, they had too much mass, which didn't make them faster. I think if I did a really long bow style design, but used some sort of really light, efficient material, maybe the speed would increase, but the mass was too much and didn't actually make the bow faster. That's where Trey's talking about these horse style bows, and he has some bows that are used with lighter materials like carbon fiber with the non-bending tips, and that actually produces a faster bow because there's not so much mass there. I'm gonna have to test that on a bow I make soon. I also think this optimal amount of backset could change based on the length of the bow, because the same bows that had 1 to 2.5 inches of reflex from the center of the handle are also the same bows that hit somewhere around 60% of its draw weight at 20 inches. In both of those scenarios, they were faster. 10 bows might seem like a lot to test, but I really feel like I need 10 recurve bows with slightly different variability, and maybe 10 long bows, and maybe 100 bows or 1,000 bows to actually get super accurate results. Also remember, bow speed is a fun hobby, but not the most important thing for most types of archery. But in order for me to prove some of my theories, I'm gonna make some bows that are super fast. Or I'll make a bow like this that I think's super fast, and it's not, and then I gotta learn. I also think it's worth noting that my goal is to help more people enjoy more archery, and all of this talk and conversation means nothing except kind of some fun to do these things, but it means nothing if you're not getting out and just shooting your bow and having a good time with some friends or by yourself relaxing. There's something special, there's almost something spiritual about archery in a sense, and it is so fun. So if you haven't done that, get outdoors, get to a range, shoot your bow, have a lot of fun, and know that that is a whole lot more important than all of these technicalities. And you don't even have to worry about these technicalities. I'll worry about them, and I'm gonna learn this, I'm gonna figure it out for you. I have learned so much when it comes to what makes a bow fast, and realized a lot of the complexities. And the thing that it makes me want to do is make some more bows. So buckle your seatbelts, because you know what I'm doing next.